Congratulations, everyone, for bringing a TOC. And then just some other stuff, like I'm deaf and he can't write very well, so if you guys wouldn't see, that would be very much appreciated. All right, so yeah. Starting time now. So we are proud to affirm the resolution that the USFG should ban hydraulic fracking. So let's go straight into the plan text, which is that the US federal government will ban hydraulic fracking in all forms. So now let's explain exactly what hydraulic fracking is. So hydraulic fracking is essentially the process where it's a way of extracting oil whereby you inject water into the ground and you get natural gas and oil from that. And a lot of the negative stuff around hydraulic fracking is associated with water injection, but you have to associate the two because in order to do hydraulic fracking, you have to do water injection. So saying that they're not the same thing is not a legitimate argument. Okay, so now let's go into the actor. So the actor will be the United States federal government. The timeline will be to announce it right now and then do the plan in 2 years. So to give businesses enough time to not be shaken up by their business confidence, we're going to give them time to adapt to the ruling. So the weighing mechanism in this round, I'll get to the end of the plan text, is net benefits. So basically we can, within this net benefits framework, we can still make ethical arguments because from a consequential standpoint, because we're still going to be talking about how, we're still going to be talking about how, like, it impacts individual people, and the funding is not really applicable. You had a question? Okay. Moving on to the first advantage, which is going to be water supply. The first background point here is that access to water in Florida is at a high risk for is at a risk for not being able to have enough water in 50 years, basically according to the Sun Sentinel. So water supply in Florida right now is really low, and it's going to run out in like 50 years. Second background point here is that fracking specifically depletes water from the driest areas in the U.S. according to The Guardian. Fracking in the last year used 97 billion gallons of water. 97 billion. The third background point here is that fracking uses fresh water, so it directly competes with water supply that people use. The fourth background point here is that shale producers are a key factor increasing water stress in county levels in Texas and other places, according to The Guardian. So basically, we can see that there's a direct correlation between fracking and excessive water use that depletes county level and water. And then the fifth background point here is that most new wells, 97% in California and 96% in Colorado, are in places where water is already at a high stress. So you can see that fracking specifically takes from those driest areas. So you can't just say like, oh, it's going to be fine because it's spread around. No, it goes in the driest areas specifically. And then the sixth background point here is that taking from freshwater reserves during a drought level permanently damages the water table and permanently makes it harder to get water. Okay. So the links here. So basically, when we implement this plan, you're going to ban fracking, which therefore means that you're not going to have a lot of water injection after that, which means that you're going to alleviate a lot of these water problems, therefore making it more water access possible. Then, which is pretty straightforward. So the impact level, so first is going to be poverty. So basically, the first thing here is that the water, when you deplete the supplies of water, it's not the rich people who don't. It's the poor people. They get dirty water, or they have to pay more for water, and that significantly impacts them. When you're what? You have to pay more for food also. Yeah, you have to pay more for food also because farming gets more expensive. So basically, this impacts poor people specifically. It makes it harder to live hand to mouth. When you're doing that, it specifically impacts them the most. Okay, the second impact here is that people have a right to water. This is a direct ethical argument. You need if you just say, oh, well, like net benefits weighs out. No, people have a right to live. They have a right to water as well. Second advantage. The second advantage is going to be that you decrease earthquakes. The first background point here is that according to the United States Geological Survey, hydraulic fracking produces wastewater, which is then injected underground. This is what causes earthquakes. That is a direct quote from the United States Geological Survey. The second background point here is that according to Business Insider, in 2010 there were 10 major earthquakes. In 2015 there were 500. 500. There is a direct link between that and fracking. Fracking is a direct consequence of a 50 times increase in earthquakes. That's ridiculous. The third background point here is that the Geological Survey, according to the Geological Survey, 7 million people now live in areas at high risk for man-made earthquakes. The fourth background point here is that infrastructure destruction the poor the most. According to Business Insider, according to Business Insider, inside earthquake zones, only 8% of earthquake insurance claims are actually paid back. So it's not like poor people can just like have insurance and it will be fine. No, the earthquake insurance has a really high bar, and it's not going to be good for them. So the fourth background, and then according to the Scientific American, the rich will move away from these man-made earthquakes, and the poor will stay in these areas because they can't afford to move. All right. I have the links. So basically, this plan bans fracking. So this is the link. So the plan bans fracking, which means there's going to be less man-made earthquakes in the long term, which is going to, which is a major cause in infrastructure destruction. This means that there's going to be less property damage. According to the Scientific American, every major disaster increases the poverty rate by 1%. 1%. That's extremely. That's like ridiculous. The third link here is going to be that it decreases segregation. Less rich people are going to be fleeing from these areas and leaving the poor in these man-made earthquake areas. And then so that the impacts. First impact would be less poverty. The cost from earthquakes make life harder. When your house gets destroyed and your earthquake insurance only pays back 8% of claims, your house is just destroyed. There's nothing. You're just gone. And so these earthquakes that are man-made, are being caused by oil companies, are exactly what we should be worried about. The second impact here is going to be that it decreases segregation. Basically, by making sure that we're not like segregating these people out, like having like basically an area where like all these structures destroyed because of man-made earthquakes, you have places where all these people are basically you have a world where there's more segregation, and that's really bad. So basically, the story of this round is that fracking is a really dangerous technology that benefits oil companies, but we should be worried about the poor more. You should not be weighing the profits and the jobs of oil companies over the livelihood of the poor. Thank you.
Everybody ready? Wait, what's the word? Disadvantage and then improvement. Okay. We negate the resolution. We believe the disadvantage is going to be that of green technology and fracking. Specifically, that green technology is being shifted to in status quo, but fracking is key to this. And eliminating this source of key income for the energy companies is especially problematic. Let's look at the uniqueness of the background information. First, we can see that public activism has actually increased, which means that companies are increasingly shifting towards green energy. A Yale Yale program actually found that in late 2018, 73% of Americans now believe that global warming is a problem, which means that this is pushing pretty much the public to push oil companies and other energy companies to shift towards developing renewables. But in addition, Bloomberg cites as to how by 2030, $5.1 trillion worth of dollars will be invested in green power plants. In addition, there are already companies that are accounting for the shift to green energy. For example, the Chevron Energy Company has already started their Chevron Venture Fund, which is intended to shift them from these sort of traditional forms of fracking and drilling and oil-based energies into new green energies. But actually listed their Game Changer Fund. They've listed green energy as one of the main targets that they're trying to invest into. So clearly right now the public is pushing energy companies, and energy companies are shifting towards developing green energy. But however, we can see that fracking is a key part of the income of this, of these companies right now, and therefore having fracking around is key to the transition, because if the company is all of a sudden going to lose all its income and all of a sudden going to die, you're obviously not going to have the transition. Let's look at exactly why fracking is so important for these companies. Specifically, there are about 137,000 drills in over 20 plus states. Obviously, this is a huge part of the energy industry in the United States. This provides for about 2/3 of the United States natural gas exports. Hydraulic fracturing provides for about 2/3 of natural gas exports. It doesn't matter if you give them a timeline of 2 years to adjust. You are still cutting off over and really leaving them with like 1/3 of possible energy exports left. But in addition, the Economic Independence Agency has found that 3.6 billion cubic feet of oil are like natural natural gas and like this stuff are gotten from hydraulic fracturing per day, which is an indication that this is a huge part of the United States, of the energy industry. In addition, this is the primary mode of domestic gas production, specifically the hydraulic fracking. The primary mode of domestic gas production, which is that most energy companies, in order to create their energy within the United States, use this method. And in addition, we can see that right now is key, specifically since they're trying to shift away and using these sort of funds to make this change. But the plan is going to cause a few main problems. Obviously, if you're losing two-thirds of your natural gas exports, which is a huge part of your economy, that's going to lead it to a few bad things. The first scenario we will pretty much argue is that they will shift to other worse methods of energy production. We will actually isolate coal. We believe that companies could shift to coal, specifically since Trump, the coal industry now has high confidence under Trump. Trump is lifting a lot of the coal mining regulations, making it so that's very cheap and affordable and risky, but like very profitable for companies to shift to coal, which means that if all of a sudden you cut off, even in 2 years, their natural gas exports by 2/3, they would actually shift to some alternative energy like coal, which we've already laid out is very likely. Now, coal is bad for a few reasons. The first is going to be that it has more greenhouse gas emissions than hydraulic fracturing, which means that this ultimately makes climate change infinitely, probably a lot worse. But in addition, it also has much greater health problems for workers, whereas specifically hydraulic fracturing, people are operating the pumps in the mines. Coal mining specifically has the risk of like black lung and mine explosions, which means it's a much higher risk industry. Yeah.
How can companies be currently shifting away to green energy and then also be going to shift back to coal? That doesn't make sense.
The argument specifically is that right now they're using the profits from fracking to shift to green energy, but absent these 2/3 of profits from natural gas, they have to find money to go to somewhere. They can't conjure money out of nowhere to get new green energy technology. In addition, coal already exists, so they can get this. Anyways, in addition, we could also see them shifting to offshore drilling, which is another thing that people are especially fond of, especially like BP. But if you look at BP's history of offshore drilling, they need to get energy from somewhere. BP, if they were to increase their offshore drilling, would only risk a second oil spill. And because they can make up 2/3 of the natural gas exports in the United States, that's obviously a lot of increase in offshore drilling, which means that you ultimately also risk the increase of these sort of gas explosions. There are multiple gas explosions, like the Gulf of Mexico has rarely ever been fully clean because there's always explosion after explosion and small sorts of leaks, which means that ultimately this devastates biodiversity. But another even worse option of what these companies could do would be specifically that they can shift their oil production and natural gas production to other countries. If it's getting impossible to do within the United States, then alternatively, if they don't want to shift to coal, don't want to shift to offshore drilling, they can shift to other countries. And that would also be extremely bad because, for example, if they were to shift to Latin America or Saudi Arabia, or the areas of the Middle East, the regulations to the environment of the oil and natural gas operations within this area are especially poor, which means that it's always preferable to have fracturing within the United States, but rather than push it off to fracking and natural gas exports through other countries. Now, we would also like to make the argument, keep in mind very key, that if any of these pretty much alternative operations like hydraulic fracturing simply shifts to other countries, that means that those other countries will simply just experience the water shortages than their problem either, which means that on net there's no shift, you're simply changing who suffers, and it's probably bad to make it so that alternative countries like Latin American countries have to suffer for our exports. Yeah.
So do you have any evidence about how regulations are less lax other than the fact that, I don't know, Saudi Arabia is just like scary?
Okay, first of all, Latin America, Saudi Arabia, and the Middle East all routinely don't enforce any sorts of regulation and safety checks on these sort of industries. In addition, corruption within the Venezuelan government makes it so that regulations and checkups are hardly enforced ever. Now, this ultimately means that A, all the alternative methods they've described are extremely bad, and B, if they don't make up any sort of profits, they risk not shifting to green energy at all because they have just simply lost the profits. They try and be tricky with their plan and say in 2 years this will cause a shift, but the problem with this is that 2 years is simply not enough to cause a fundamental shift to green energy entirely, which means that alternative forms of energy like oil and natural gas are still necessary. Ultimately, if we want to get to green energy, which is probably the #1 way to solve climate change, we need to be having this sort of fracking in the interim to get to the long-term effects. Now let's go on to their advantage. First, they talk about how the water supply is key. However, there are a few problems with this advantage. First, water pollution and water shortages are inevitable. Few reasons. First, Trump has already decreased agricultural runoff regulations, which means that the water supply around most farms within the United States are already going down in quality because a lot of the pesticides and runoff are already polluting the streams. But in addition, poor people lose water quality for other reasons. Specifically, for example, low-income areas tend to spend less water on their water treatment plants. And in addition, there's also less pipe renovation. For example, if you look at Flint, it wasn't because the fracking companies were destroying water supplies, because the company was doing a terrible job at keeping up like water pipes, which means poor people in low-income communities spend less on water treatment, not right now, and also are inevitably going to lose water for a different reason. But in addition, if you make climate change worse, for example, if they shift to coal offshore drilling or drilling in other countries, that means that climate change only gets worse, which increases the risk of drought, and ultimately means that everyone loses water equally even more. Now they talk about how there's going to be like, stopping fracking is going to solve the water supply. However, there's no link for this because we can see that a lot of the wells that they talk about in these areas are already polluted from shale runoff, from hydraulic fracturing runoff, which means even if you stop the fracking right now, those wells and a lot of the water supplies are already polluted by the existing fracking, which means that the water supply there is useless in the first place. It probably should not be evaluated. Then they go on to talk about how earthquakes are a major problem, but a few problems here. First is that offshore drilling, which is one of the options, and coal mining are all causes of earthquakes as well. In addition, if they shifted offshore, you would also see the earthquakes happen anyways. The statistics about earthquakes happening would simply be caused by different reasons. They say that there's going to be decreased segregation for some reason. They might go for this, and they might go for water comes first. However, water is already polluted, and segregation is caused by many different causes, such as like gentrification and government redlining. Ultimately, we believe that you should let the fracking, transition to green energy.
This out and then the case in order and then just like debate. Okay. Everyone ready? So start time now. On their disadvantage, the fundamental logic is very flawed and they don't tell you how fixing climate change helps the poor at all compared to stopping fracking. More specifically, when they tell you that public activism is already shifting towards climate change and that many people believe global warming is happening, therefore we need to make it worse so that we get more activism, this logic is fundamentally flawed. We can't keep doing the same things if they literally lead to climate change. That should be very clear by now. When they talk about how there's $1 trillion shift already by 2030, $1 trillion shift is not enough where one country's oil production would immediately stop all of this. When they talk about how Chevron and Shell are already shifting into this, this is because they face public pressure independent of the fracking. They face pressure from protests about all of these things. Exactly, there's no reason why fracking is the one thing that makes them shift when the whole entire world is encouraging them to shift and they see in the market opportunity. When they talk about how it provides 2/3 of gas exports, again, I'm going to get to it later, but other countries will fill the gas gap. Yeah, we can get to it right now. So basically, according to Scientific American, renewable energy is already surging in the status quo. Also, Russia, Saudi Arabia, China produce more than enough oil to make up for the difference in production of the US's production. And according to Wall Street Journal, oil prices are at an all-time low. The problem is that we have too much oil right now. Don't buy this analysis. When they said, so basically on this, the first link is that they could shift to coal. Flat out, don't buy this. Coal is a dead industry. There are less coal miners than there are people who work at Arby's. That's a fact. It's not an industry anymore. In the ocean, you're not causing an earthquake that destroys poor people's houses. And they can see that poor people are the most important thing to talk about. That's what we're talking about. Net benefits. How we treat the poorest Americans in today's debate. The fourth one is that they will shift to other countries and that this is bad. They flat out don't read you evidence that other countries don't have regulations. I asked for it and they said Saudi Arabia doesn't enforce regulations. I don't know what that means. I don't know about Saudi Arabia's oil policy. In response to Venezuela, yeah, that's because Venezuela's collapsing as a country. I didn't read it out for that reason. Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China all have regulations that they have not proven are worse. On the impact of solving climate change, they don't explain to you how this helps the poor people, or how it's enough to solve climate change. We see that stopping fracking is the way to actually help people in a real, tangible way. Not just we decrease emissions, which is good. We're talking about stopping actual earthquakes that destroy people's houses and puts them in poverty. On to the first advantage. They talk about how water shortages are inevitable. They say that Trump has already decreased regulation for agricultural runoff. People have bad water anyway. You make it uniquely worse by not banning fracking. That's what we are saying, is that the fracking industry is what makes water supplies an even bigger issue. Look to our uniqueness about how 97% of the oil wells are in places with high water stress. It uses fresh water, and and it harms water usage, proven. So basically, when they talk about how it's already bad, that doesn't mean that we can't make it better. When they talk about how we make climate change worse from droughts, this is a long-term impact. We're talking about the short term. We are already depleting all of our water supplies. And they have not given you enough analysis that we're going to shift to a dying coal industry, or that Russia somehow manages to pollute twice as much as we do with the same oil, that this is going to be a significant enough impact. It doesn't make sense from a logical perspective. So, on the links, the plan still holds. When we do this, less water is used in the industry, which flat out means more water access when this uniquely takes away water from citizens and agriculture. This means less poverty, as water is cheaper and so is food. They do not contest this. And people have a fundamental right to water. I don't care about long-term climate change if they can't explain why it's important to poor people. Yeah.
Yeah, so you say they won't shift to coal, go to other countries. How do you expect companies to make up their missing profits?
I didn't say they wouldn't ship to other countries. I said they could, and that you didn't explain why the regulation is worse. They will not make up their profits by going to oil because coal, because you can't make a profit anymore. That's why the industry's dying. They'll make it up with renewable energy. Again, it's already surging in the status quo because there's a huge market space. On the second advantage, which is about decreasing earthquakes, basically there's too much evidence here that this uniquely will help people in the real world. Not that we're just stopping climate change by vaguely decreasing oil in some convoluted way. We stop earthquakes flat out. According to the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, fracking uses wastewater injection, which is proven to cause earthquakes. Man-made earthquakes. They talk about how off-drilling and coal all cause earthquakes. I don't have a source for this. I read you the US Geological source. I'm pretty sure they're just speculating. Yeah.
So will you concede that fracking goes to other countries?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a little bit, actually. Okay, so, yeah, when we talk about fracking going to other countries are not using fracking right now. It's a uniquely U.S. problem. They read you that. They say that 2/3 of the U.S.'s oil, natural gas production is from fracking. Other countries are not using this technology, partly because of earthquake concerns. Okay, now let's go on to the rest of this. When we talk about how Oklahoma, in 2010, before fracking became a major practice, had 10 major earthquakes a year. 2015 was 500. Out of the gate, that is a huge proven impact. When we talk about how, according to the USGS, 7 million people live in areas at high risk for man-made earthquakes. This is a huge number compared to the coal miners that work in the industry. Less than work at Arby's. It's a few thousand or something. When we talk about how it hurts the poor, because 8% of claims only get renewed, this means that earthquakes are uniquely what hurt poor people in the short term. We can't just predict that solving this one thing will solve climate change, which saves all the poor people. They have not given enough unique evidence for this. We show that this is a plan that will help poor people. So, on the link level, or what will happen? We show you that there are less earthquakes because of the less wastewater. This means less poverty. Again, according to Scientific American, every single major natural disaster leads to a 1% rise in poverty. We're the only ones giving you statistics on impacts because all of their case is speculation that in the long term they just fix global warming. Third is less segregation. They say that there are other causes for segregation. Yes, there are other causes, but again, the status quo, it makes it worse with the fracking technology. So, fundamentally, today's debate is about the poor. They've tried to make it about climate change, but they have not explained how that actually impacts real people. We're talking about net benefits here. That's what we proposed as the weighing mechanism for today's debate, and they agreed to it. We have to talk about how this impacts individual lives. Now, maybe you can buy that somehow climate change gets 1,000 times worse because Russia uses dirty oil, which is much worse for everyone. But this is not enough to win them the debate. That's a very convoluted link chain. We read you arguments and evidence about how this will help poor people now. It will reduce earthquakes, which poor people cannot get their houses rebuilt from insurance. That's a basic and huge quality of life increase. It makes food cheaper. Like, come on. And then it also makes the water supply better. So fundamentally, they're going to come up here and say we're not doing enough and that there's slight issues. Okay, it's still better than what they're proposing. They only have a weird argument about how technically they might solve climate change because everyone's going to go for coal even though it's not a profitable industry anymore. So because of the fact that we have proven that we actually help people, which is how you win net benefits, I urge a strong affirmation ballot.
people who live along the coast are people who are considered low-income or minority vulnerable populations. And this is bad for two reasons. Number one is that of fishing. When climate change happens, or when things like offshore drilling happen after they're planned, and it pollutes the water, it rises, it causes an increase in ocean temperatures, that really detriments things like fish populations. And that is something that a lot of people who live on the coast rely on economically in order to sustain themselves. The second thing is going to be that of flooding. As sea levels rise, the people who are most likely to be displaced are those who we would consider to be poor people under their plan. That is pretty bad because it forces them to either be homeless or to move inland where disease spreads faster when you live in closer, not very well insulated facilities. That's also probably pretty detrimental to the low income. The third reason why it's bad for low income people is that of resource wars. Specifically in developing countries, which they don't tend to talk about that much, one of the things that's really bad about climate change is that people are really negatively affected by drought and don't have many other resources like we do in the United States, which means that it causes things such as resource wars or conflict over more energy efficient communities. Yes?
Yeah, if the demand for green energy goes up and there's more competition for green energy, wouldn't the price actually go down?
Yeah, but we're going to say there's not going to be more competition and the price is not going to go down because people aren't going to be producing it as much, which I'll get into a little bit now as I go over our disadvantage. But basically, overall summary is that climate change is worse than almost anything, including water shortages, and has the widest amount of impact for low-income people, which is a reason to be preferred the negation. Now, yeah, so let's go over the disadvantages, specifically why this is going to be detrimental to green technology. Now, as I just stated, as green energy is going up in the status quo, it doesn't seem like it would make sense that that would be going down. However, the thing that's going to change with the passage of the affirmation plan is now companies are not going to be able to afford developing green technology anymore. The reason why people such as Shell and Chevron are investing in these new green tech ventures and new development is because of the profit they're making from things like fracking, which applies 2/3 of that profit, a statistic which they concede. That means that if 2/3 of their profit, specifically on gas from the United States domestically, is coming from fracking, and they're not allowed to do that anymore, they're going to have to shift to other ways to make profit. That profit is probably not going to be quite as much as fracking, and it's going to take a long time to transfer, which means in that interim period, they're not going to be investing in green energy, and instead are going to be turning towards even worse methods, such as going to other countries. That is why it would negatively affect green energy, which could increase climate change, which is, even if it's in a short term, or even if it's just this interim period of increasing the amount of emissions that are going to be caused, since we're so close to the brink on global warming, it's probably bad to have any period of time when companies are not investing in green energy. So let's go on to the specifics of this disadvantage. First of all, on our uniqueness level, we talk about why companies and public activism are creating a shift in green energy. And in the status quo, things like fracking are going to go down. These negative things they talk about are being solved right now. There's not a ton of fracking expansion because there's so much pressure and so much investment in things like green energy. The status quo is good, and the status quo is solving for the problems they talk about. Now, they make this response about how it's only because of, not at this time, it's only because of public pressure and how you need to make more money in order to get activism. However, it doesn't matter why companies are switching. It doesn't matter if it's because of how much money they're going to make, because of public activism. The question is, once they don't have money and they cannot afford green energy anymore, what are they going to do? And the chances are you're probably going to try and do things to make money that aren't risky green tech investment because you just don't have the confidence in a 2/3 profit to do that anymore, not right now. Now, the second point we talked about was how fracking specifically is keeping funds for these companies. Now, they make this argument about how we don't have any statistics, and you probably can't refer it because it's all speculation. Let me go over a few statistics from a second weakness point. There are 130,000 wells in 20+ states that are supplying profit for fracking companies. 2/3 of the United States exports of natural gas come from fracking. The Energy Efficiency Agency, which was also the source for the warrant about why there are earthquakes that are occurring everywhere, says that we have 3.6 billion cubic feet of oil produced per day that comes from fracking, which means that this is definitely very impactful with these companies and the profit that a lot of industries in the United States generate. Now, the only other argument they make here is that, but this production can be made up in places like Russia and Saudi Arabia. We're going to say that's probably an argument for the negation, because if you're forcing these companies to make up their profit by just outsourcing drilling to places like Russia and Saudi Arabia, that's probably going to be worse, because one, this means these companies definitely don't make a profit anymore because now they're buying their oil instead of selling it. This is bad because obviously it means that they're not going to have money to invest in things like green energy, which they concede is pretty important for solving climate change. But second of all, we're going to, if you go to our impact level here, we specifically talk about why producing things in foreign countries has low regulations. Now, we gave the example of how countries such as Saudi Arabia tend not to enforce their regulations because the government is a lot of these companies have corrupt leadership that is close with the government and they don't enforce regulations. But a second thing I'd like to point out is that specifically the Mexican oil industry, which is one of the places where the United States is considered buying oil from, the Mexican oil industry has some of the highest death rates per oil industry than any other country in the world. Now this is not just because, like, this is not just random, this is because it's not well enforced in these industries, and this is probably problematic and a reason why the United States is going to be better, not at this time. So even if you buy their arguments about how nobody's going to switch to coal because it's a dying industry, or about how there aren't earthquakes caused by offshore drilling, which there are, we're probably going to say the most likely thing that's going to happen, according to their arguments, are that people are just going to go to Mexico and Russia, which are probably worse, and lose these companies even more money. So now let's go on to the affirmation arguments. Their first argument is about water supply. So first of all, extend the reasons why the water supply crisis is pretty inevitable in the status quo. But there's one more extension here that's pretty important, which is that all of these wells are already polluted. Now, what's happening, according to the uniqueness that is conceded by the affirmation, is that there is not an expansion of fracking right now. There is an expansion of green energy, but fracking itself is not expanding because companies are shifting to green energy. That means there's a very low probability they're going to drill a lot more wells. They're probably going to stick with the ones they already have. And the wells that already exist are already polluted. They themselves state that polluted wells are permanent damage and you cannot fix it. So if these wells are permanently damaged and they're not going to probably drill many more and you can't fix it anyway, it means they probably have little impact on this first advantage, not at this time. Now, additionally, the one other thing I'd like to say on the water supply point is that by making climate change worse, by creating more of a drought, because you're making climate change worse because there's not as much green energy, this is always going to turn their point because more climate change means more drought, means less water. They say that this is a long-term impact. Yeah, long-term impacts are probably going to affect most people. Since it's a net benefit for poor people around, we're going to say that most poor people in the long term are going to be affected by climate change more than just a few people with a couple drills that might be like built, and that's probably not going to happen very much in the future. And their second advantage was that of earthquakes. First of all, we specifically talk about how things might transfer to you, such as the other countries. Other countries frack too. They say that this isn't true, but we export so much of like fracking equipment to countries in Latin America, such as Mexico, so a lot of other countries are fracking, and even if they're not right now, they're going to start when the US outsources its energy. And fracking just means earthquakes will be caused in other countries, and water pollution will be caused in other countries instead of the US, so they don't get anything.
Status quo is a shift to sustainability in green energy, and even if it is a slow and long ride, it's still better than devastating the profits of the companies leading that shift. In addition, they've conceded to you that these energy companies that are operating within the United States right now are going to move to other countries. They've granted us that argument. They've said they will shift to other countries, and that is going to be devastating for their side as well because it takes out all of their offense and non-uniques everything. Let's go to specifically the disadvantage first. They seem to have read some pre-prepared answers on this disadvantage, but they don't specifically respond to the articulation of what the thesis is. The thesis is companies are shifting to sustainable green energy right now because of public pressure. However, they need to do this with the funds that they get from from natural gas that is gotten 2/3 through hydraulic fracking. Now, absent these profits, they have to make up this profit either somehow, or two, not go to green energy at all because they literally do not have the money to do so. Now, two specific articulations that they might, two responses that they might go for here in the last speech. They might say, oh, companies will shift regardless because they're going because the public is pressuring them. Even if the public is pressuring them to death, they still need money, or they still need profits from somewhere to fuel this sort of shift to green energy, which means that the fact that they've conceded how hydraulic fracturing accounts for so much of these companies' profits in the list of 4 or 5 points that went conceded in the second speech shows that even if the public is pressuring them, these profits are key, and if they lose these, they will have to shift and go offshores or stop green energy. They might also go for the argument that green energy will get cheaper as it goes, but that is still non-interactive with the argument that they need these profits right now. It doesn't matter if green energy gets cheaper in the future. In the interim 2 years and 2 years from the next 2 years, you need the fracking energy, fracking profits because it is 2/3 of the United States natural gas exports. That profit needs to come from somewhere, which means that they, even in their own speech, have conceded, yes, they will go to other countries. And their only response to this is, Other countries, one, don't do fracking, and two, can't isolate why they have bad regulations. First, the United States is one of the most stringent regulations through the EPA. Most other countries like Saudi Arabia have their government tied in with the oil industry, which means of course they want to make profits. Of course they're going to be very lax on the enforcement of regulations.
Okay, point of order, stop time. The specific argument about how like oil companies are tied into the government is completely new, and we won't really have a chance to respond to it except in the last speech. So I don't think you guys should consider it.
Okay, your response?
First of all, this is an argument, an extension of the argument that I've made since the first speech that Saudi Arabia does not enforce regulations, simply additional analytics as to why this is true since they questioned why it's true in their second speech.
Okay, your panel.
It's a panel, so it's under consideration.
Got it.
Yeah.
Ready?
Alright, 151. Alright. So obviously it's much more lax. The US has a much more stringent EPA, which means that two things happen. One, the oil and fracking and oil drilling in other countries is obviously infinitely worse and bad for the environment, or two, you do not get green energy in the first place. But at the point in which they tell you they will go to other countries and we export fracking equipment to other countries, that just means all of their impacts of water pollution and earthquakes are going to be transferred to other countries. They want to talk about protecting the low-income community. I think it's pretty messed up that you are shifting the United States, who is pretty privileged as a country, unite low-income problems, and all of a sudden shifting it to the population in Saudi Arabia or Latin America.
Okay,
and all of a sudden making
stop time. The fact that like other populations are less wealthy than the U.S. and that's relevant to today's debate is entirely new also.
First of all, Sophie made that argument, but also second, this is a weighing argument, and also another weighing argument that non-uniques are dissat. In addition, my first speech talked about how shifting all of this towards poorer countries like Latin America is already messed up.
Okay,
117.
Go ahead.
Which means that they tell you we are shifting these water problems and these earthquakes to other countries that do not have the infrastructure nor the income to deal with this problem, which if they want to talk about protecting the low-income community is very, very immoral, and you should not be doing that in the first place. And remember, broad picture, the status quo is a shift to green energy. Green energy is looking to solve climate change. Climate change affects everyone, rich and poor, which means the status quo is trying to protect everyone through the shift to green energy by using fracking profits in the intro to get there. There's only a risk that somehow we transfer all of these problems to other countries and make it so low-income communities there are even less likely to be able to deal with it, or they get even worse earthquakes. Now let's also look at some terminal defense on the affirmative case. They've already conceded that low-income communities and cities tend to spend less on water treatment, and the water supply is usually already polluted from fracking, which means their first advantage of water supply is probably not unique. But in addition, the second argument of earthquakes is probably sufficiently answered by the fact that, sure, though we might have bad earthquake insurance within the United States, I guarantee you there are very few forms of insurance at all in other countries like Latin America or Saudi Arabia, and if earthquakes are going to happen there, and they conceded that it will happen in other countries, whether it's fracking or other sorts of drilling or mining in those countries, safety regulations are so low, you only shift the risk of earthquakes and death to other countries, and that is obviously going to be far worse, which means you should prefer the status quo. It is a slow, positive shift.
Okay. Voters, just put it on your sheet. Starting time now. The moment that my opponents refuse to provide evidence and actually explain why all the stuff that they cite actually means anything, they should lose this round. You should prefer our evidence that we read to you, and we give you sources and reasons as to why all of this happens. That is a reason they lose this round. So let's talk about voters. The first voter is going to be climate change. So they talk about how like people on the coast are poor and like climate change is bad, but the key thing that loses them this argument is they don't explain to you why this is the brand. They don't explain to you why specifically us banning fracking and moving to other countries is going to make this all worse. They don't explain that. They just say, oh, it's gonna like have worse regulations, which is gonna lead to climate change, I guess. That's not good enough for me. The impacts that you should prefer are the impacts that we read you, the impacts that poor people are going to have a harder time paying for food, that people are going to have their houses destroyed by earthquakes.
So we've been talking about how green energy is key to solving climate change in the first place. The argument specifically that climate change has no brink in relation to fracking is a new argument in the final speech.
I talked about how they had no evidence that this would cause like climate change. That's the same exact.
That was like the main point of the speech. All right, we'll move on. All right, so basically they cannot claim that this is going to uniquely make climate change worse. They don't have evidence for that. They don't have a link story for that. So they cannot claim that impact. They lose the round on that alone. The second voter is the shifts. So basically, first, coal is a dead industry, so coal is a dead industry, and specifically, they cool concede the fact that we read a card that says that Saudi Arabia and Russia already have enough oil to replace all of the oil that we're talking about. That goes cold conceded. This means that all of their arguments about how there's going to be like more fracking and all that stuff doesn't make sense, because my partner specifically makes arguments about how the problem in the status quo is that we have too much oil, not too little. So all of their arguments on that don't make any sense. They have no evidence for regulations. Like, there's no evidence that other countries have worse regulation. And even if they do, they use different methods, and they don't prove why offshore drilling causes earthquakes when we tell you specifically why, and they don't use it as much. Even if they're going to start like new industries and all that, it's going to take a while for that infrastructure to build up, and they're going to prefer the infrastructure they already have. So the green energy market is a large one, and that's why there's investment. The reason why there's investment is because coal investment in the status quo is going down. So basically, the third voter is going to be water. When we read you, fracking requires huge amounts of fresh water. We also talk about how people deserve a right to water regardless of benefits, and they concede that. That is a voter issue in the round. When they concede that people have a fundamental right to water over anything else, that is a cold conceded impact in the round. They already say that water is already bad, but they're actively making this worse by still allowing fracking in the status quo. They're actively making it worse. And the fourth voter is going to be earthquakes. Oklahoma went from 10 earthquakes to 250 earthquakes in 5 years. This is a very direct impact of fracking. And after fracking, only 8% of insurance claims are fulfilled. When we read you evidence that this is going to empirically decrease all of these impacts, and they don't give you any evidence that this is going to actually go to other countries other than just saying it, then you should refer us on that impact. All right, so now let's do some impact weighing. So the first impact weighing we're going to do is probability. Prefer probability because otherwise we're just going to randomly guess. We read you evidence that fracking is directly responsible for earthquakes and water shortages, and they just give you evidence how it's just going to go to other countries for some reason. They don't prove that this is the plan that will cause climate change. You cannot believe that. There's no sources that shifting to other countries is worse. They don't give you evidence for that. So the second thing that on impact weighing is going to be like the actual magnitude of the impact. 7 million people live in these man-made earthquake areas, and they talk about coastal communities, but we give you the numbers of the people that are affected, and especially when they can't prove that climate change is actually going to be made worse by our plan, they cannot claim that impact, and so we have the bigger impact. On time frame, prefer the short term. This is really, really key. They're talking about long-term climate change impact, but we're talking about direct water source and earthquake impacts right now. Prefer those over speculative climate change impacts that have convoluted link chains. That we win on the time frame straight out. So the story of this round is essentially that we are winning this round because we give you evidence, we give you link chains, and we give you a better reason to vote for us. So you're voting out. Thank you.